Right, so in the interest of not wasting time, because we've only got 30 minutes here, I'm going to go through my presentation and get started now. So my name's Jonty. I'm a cloud architect working for a startup in Manchester called One Voice Digital. Today's talk's really going to be focused about what you might do, either walking into a new job or just starting to use cloud or a new consulting gig or something like that. And it's going to be kind of quite high level, and it's going to go through a bunch of stuff I'd recommend you start using and start looking at. There's going to be a bunch of links in the presentation that go to reInvent presentations from this year. I'll make the slides available afterwards, and you guys can look at them afterwards, but I'd really recommend watching some of these videos and understanding what you're doing. This presentation assumes the environment you're working in has got quite a low level of cloud maturity. So that means that you might have had a developers running a couple of apps or doing a couple of things, and it might not be that well structured. So, points we're going to go through. So we'll talk about what you might do in week one. So when you land in an organization, what you do and how you work within it. We'll talk about some quick wins you can get for your organization in terms of low-hanging fruit. And then we'll also talk about maybe some expensive mistakes you could make, which you'd really want to avoid. And then last of all, we'll talk about maybe what you could do about building a foundation of services for moving forwards. So that's really about what does good look like and what may you want to do. And it's really kind of my view on that kind of world. So, what do you do in week one? So really this is about what you do first. It's really talking about the first things you might do when you enter a new organization, looking around sort of some of the elements of, if anyone's familiar with the Amazon well-architected framework, stick your hand up if you are, or not. Okay, a few people. This is a framework Amazon have about how you can understand whether you're using Amazon in a sort of well-architected way. This bit of the section will talk on a couple of different areas, which is really around security, efficiency and costs, and also reliability. So, first one's about getting access. So what do you do when you land? How do you get access? How do you access environments safely, and what do you do with that? Next up we have, okay, there we go. It's about actually making a map. So I'm talking figuratively here. It's a really useful technique to actually draw what you've got in an environment and understand it a bit more. The next one's really about how you can observe what's going on. There's a lot of people talk about observability nowadays, but really it's just about opening your eyes and understanding what's in an environment, how it might work. And then the last one is about how do you understand priorities for what you need to do next and what stakeholders might be interested in. So getting access. Get hold of every kind of access you can, really. So if you're in an organization using one account, try and get the root account. If you're in an organization using many AWS accounts, get as many accounts as you can, just to try and understand what's there. In terms of access, if everyone's familiar, an Amazon account has a root account, which is like effectively root in that account. And then there's a number of user accounts you can have which have API keys associated with them, which would be I am users. So what you should really do in terms of the strategy for going in and reviewing an estate is create an I am user and really associate it with a number of the standard policies that Amazon provide for you. So there's one here called security audit and one called read-only access. Attach them to user and then log out of whatever you're using and just use that user account to do your discovery work, because then you can do it safely without worrying about affecting anything that's running in production. So if you're lucky, the organization you're walking into might be using something called AWS organizations. So this is really about back doesn't work, never mind. We'll come back to this slide in a minute. But organizations is really around a way to manage more than one account at once. No. So AWS is using organizations really. Moving forwards, it's sort of a new service that appeared about 2 years ago. It is now a thing that's going to be used for a lot more services moving forwards, and you've seen more services come out of the last year using organizations. That makes things a lot easier. So, assume you've got access to accounts. What you really need to do is understand how many accounts have you got in use, where are they, and then it's also about what workloads are running in those accounts. So we're talking about which applications, who owns those applications, where are they used, and what are they used for? So what data is held in those applications. And after your applications, you get what environments are running. So quite often where you've got a single application running, you might have a development environment, a production environment, a test environment. It's really about understanding where all of those are. And once you've got them, just draw them out. I'm actually talking figuratively here. Literally draw it out on a piece of paper, stick it on a wall if you can in the organization, and try and understand what you've got. It doesn't have to be right, but it's about starting the conversation with everyone in your organization to understand around what is used in which environment. And quite often there'll be some skeletons here. So you'll find that there'll be development apps in production and production apps in staging and all these kind of things. So really it's about getting it out, be visible, be transparent. And it's quite important to then understand and have that conversation about what lives where. So once you've got your map, then it's about observing and understanding. So best place to start is with CloudWatch. CloudWatch is awesome, and it'll allow you to get a really good understanding of what's in the environment. And if you're first week in your job, I'd honestly recommend just spend an hour a day just routing through CloudWatch to see what you can see and to understand about what are the anti-patterns, what are the traffic patterns, how is it working, what is it doing. Beyond that, in terms of understanding what you've got in your account, I'd recommend, there's a bunch of tooling in this space. There are a bunch of vendors. I don't think we've got any here today that sell these kind of products, but there are a bunch. But likewise, I'd always recommend starting with open source tools. So there's a chap called Tony DeFuente. I think he's an AWS hero, I'm not sure. He maintains a tool called Prowler, which is a security tool. But he also maintains a massive list of really, really useful open source technology to do with security analysis, audit, discovery. The link's there on GitHub. I'd recommend looking at a couple. So in terms of my view of understanding it, we're going to talk about a couple of tools I've used that I found really useful in terms of this process. So first up is Scout Suite. So this is a successor to a tool that used to be called Scout 2. It's been written, it's an open source project maintained by NCC Group, who are based in Spinningfields in Manchester. What it does is you point at an account, you give it a set of credentials, and it will go around and absolutely discover everything and tell you how well it is built compared to what we might consider AWS best practice. It uses a traffic light system, so it's quite easy to see. You'll get an awful lot of red in this report. Just warning you, don't worry about that. But what it does tell you is it gives you quite a good idea about maybe where some of the really problematic areas are. So it's just worth reading everything that's red and understanding what you might need to do next with it. So another one that's really useful is Jira Security's Cloud Mapper. This will actually draw a map for you. It's not that good a map, but it will at least give you an understanding. But again, it's another inventory tool that will go through and look at your account. It can build you a navigable map on a web server, or it can generate a number of reports. Again, a little bit against best practice, but it'll also give a view of the world. I was checking my timings. A view of the world based on is it in line with best practice? Are there any major problems with the account? So really, it's a really useful thing to understand more about what you've got and where is it. So once you've you've got a map, you've observed what's there, you've got a good understanding of what's in every account. What do you do next? So you'll probably find one of these. This is a dumpster fire. If you're going into a new organization that has been using cloud for a while, but maybe hasn't given it a lot of love, you'll probably find a whole bunch of problems and things that people have ignored or just going, oh, we know we're not doing that right, but we're not going to do it because it's not important for us as a priority. The important thing is you'll probably find a couple of these that need to be dealt with quite quickly. So in terms of things like API keys that are 2 years old, that no one knows where they are. You've got applications with secret keys and actual tools for accessing AWS in the source code. I've seen these numerous times in the past. So it's about trying to understand these and just deal with these. So what comes next? It's about what you can do that's going to quickly give you a benefit for stakeholders and also for yourself and the engineers working on projects working with you. Quite often Amazon has built a whole bunch of managed services to solve problems that we have as engineers and developers. And a lot of these actually enable them as simply as ticking a checkbox. Yes, there might be a small amount of money to pay, but it's about the benefit you get from that. So one of the surprising things that surprised me over the last 10 years of working with AWS is that Amazon is all about us, which is quite interesting. So it's about, they generally want us to succeed, because when we succeed, they make more money. So it's quite interesting. It's a beneficial relationship. But because they're a very customer-centric organization, what's interesting is that one of the things you can do to actually say, hello, I'm a customer, I want genuine help, is actually to purchase business support. And that unlocks a massive benefit of things you can get as an organization. Even if you just do it as part of a short discovery process, it's worth doing because when you say Amazon support, it's not just something's broken with my Amazon environment. It's like, I need some help, and they'll help you with fixing Amazon services, actually troubleshooting problems with Linux boxes. I had a customer or someone I worked with, and they had a problem with a really obscure LDAP server. Amazon managed to find someone who understood that technology and could help us. So it's worth reaching out and raising a case if you're stuck with something. It's not just, I can't get this S3 bucket or I can't get this IAM policy to work. It's much broader than that. And I mostly recommend signing up for it. The thing that it also gets you is it gets you a full set of Trusted Advisor checks. If you're not familiar with Trusted Advisor, it's worth looking at. So it provides you a dashboard and a bit of a kind of another compliance view or best practice view of the world in your Amazon account. You normally get 7 checks, I think, if on the standard account. You get like 55 plus now if you've got business support, so it's definitely worth looking at, and that'll give you another set of recommendations and high priority items to deal with. Beyond support, security and audit is really important. So what you can do is it's about gaining visibility and understanding about any problems you've got and getting early sight of those problems. These 3 services, so CloudTrail, GuardDuty, AWS Config, are all really worth turning on. They're nothing to do with your application. It will cost you between $10 and $100 a month for most accounts to turn these services on, and it'll give you much better visibility of what's going on in it. It'll allow you then to make decisions with data rather than just thinking that feels a bit insecure. So what do they do? Let's go through them one by one. So CloudTrail is a log of everything that happens in AWS. It's just turn it on is what you should do. If you're lucky enough to be using AWS organizations, which we talked about a minute ago, as of a couple of months ago, there's now an option where you can turn on CloudTrail across every single account you own and operate, and you can prevent people turning it off in those accounts. So that's a really good thing to do. It can dump the logs to S3. It can actually pipe into CloudWatch logs. You can stick it in an Elk stack. You can do whatever you want with it. But what it does allow you to do, also from a console perspective and from an API perspective, is you can go around and see, okay, someone did something, what do they do, when do they do it, or if I've got a problem, what's happening and why am I getting that problem? So it's logging, basically. It's a regional service, so you have to turn it on in each region, but it can be told, you can aggregate all the region's data in one S3 bucket. Next one. Oh, what's going on? Forgetting my clicker, you have to bear with me, guys. So GuardDuty is another one. GuardDuty is really useful. It is a threat detection service based on a whole bunch of rules that Amazon have created to understand data built from sort of logging systems in terms of CloudTrail logs, DNS flow logs, and also flow logs. That's network traffic and DNS traffic to understand about what's going on. On the console, it's a click a button and turn it on. Otherwise, it's 4 lines of CloudFormation. You can aggregate data from multiple accounts into one account, so you can get a very good view of things. It's not that expensive. Long term, it basically creates findings. There's a kind of rich ecosystem now around this product, so other vendors are starting to also pipe data into it. This is sort of going into, there's a new product or service in development by Amazon called Security Hub. It's not general availability yet, but it builds on this and some of these other services to give you a single pane view of glass of security within an organization. It's worth looking at. And then Config, this is my favorite service probably. A lot of people don't really know what Config does. I'd honestly recommend you turn it on. What it does is it builds a database and tracks the state of every single thing in your Amazon account. And so you can understand about what changed, when did it change, and who changed it. It allows you to very easily to go through and look at how long the stuff been around for, has there been any problems with it, has stuff changed. It's about 0.3 cent per thing in your account. So if you've got 2,000 objects, be there S3 buckets, instances, anything else, you can get a view of them all quite easily with this. Again, it's a regional service, but you can turn it on as and when you need it in which region. So what does it look like? It looks a bit like this. So this is the UI. So you can go back and it's all sort of like time machine for AWS is kind of the way I term it. So you can go back and see what state was things in and see what state it is moving forwards. It's very useful in terms of understanding it. And you can also drive behavior off this. So if there's an event in config, you can then do something with that and set up a Lambda function that will then say you can fix that thing that goes wrong or do other changes. More wider than config, there's a thing called config rules. So this is something you'd probably normally associate with config, which is you can set up a number of compliance monitors. So Amazon provide a whole bunch of pre-canned rules you can use. You can just install them in your account. When you've got a config rule, it will check every change in your account to ensure that it is compliant with standards, such as make sure there are no API keys over 90 days old and things like this. And it'll give you a dashboard based on compliance status again. Config rules can get quite expensive. They're about $2 per rule per month. Not a lot if you're using one account. If you've got 100 accounts, it can add up. Okay, so talk now about reliability. So we talked about the well-architected framework earlier. This is something that's worth checking out for you guys. It's worth reading the documentation. It'll talk about the principles about how you build applications in Amazon and how you do them in a kind of an efficient, well-organized way. Interesting enough, as of reInvent this year, Amazon have released kind of their internal tool with some knobs and bells on, which is called now the well-architected tool, which actually walk you through a questionnaire about your applications. And then at the end of that process, it will give you an action plan about things you might want to look at and consider doing to improve the quality of that application. Additionally, there's a number of partners in the room today. There is a well-architected partner classification now in the Amazon Partner Network. A lot of these partners will come and do a well-architected review with you for a half day free of charge. Obviously, they want to win some consulting business, so go into it with your eyes open, but the Partner Network is there to help you for this thing as well. So let's talk about cost. If my slides are completely out of sync, let me know, because I'm struggling a bit. Cost is really interesting. So one of the things about Amazon, because it is an infinite pool of resource, it can cost a lot of money. It shouldn't do. So what I'd suggest is you set a budget. That's an AWS budget as soon as you get into an organization, because then you have basically a fire break to understand if there's anything going on that is going to cost you a lot more money than it should do. It's worth doing. Tagging strategy, I'll come back to this in a minute, is really useful, and I'd recommend people try and implement one if they can. What this means is every single thing in Amazon has metadata associated with it called tags, which you can define. So you can do things like which project does this instance belong to, which cost center does this thing belong to. Start to work on what a tagging strategy is. It will seem painful as you start doing it, and developers will complain, but it will give you a massive amount of ability in future to manage that stuff. I'd also suggest shutting down environments when you're not using them, so dev environments, test environments, staging environments. Amazon has a tool called the scheduler, which is a CloudFormation stack, which is a Lambda function with some DynamoDB behind it. That will do things like automatically shut down instances or databases on a specific schedule you can define, so it's worth looking at. And the last one, if you're doing anything with containers or any other environments, I'd really recommend looking at the Spot instances. So what Spot is, it's basically a kind of process where you can request an instance to run for you. Amazon may take it back off you at 2 minutes notice, so it's not super reliable. But if you've built a well-architected application, Spot is worth looking at. It'll save you about 2/3 of your bill, so it'll go down from full price to about 1/3 of the price, which is cheaper than you get with reserved instances. Amazon has done a lot of work for you in their Spot labs, so there's a link to GitHub here, which is basically kind of use cases of just about every single kind of use of Spot. If you're using ECS or EKS or these kind of services, Spot is, you should really be using Spot, full stop, in production. It's fine. So, there we go. We talked about cost. It can spiral out of control. So there's a few things you need to look at in terms of trying to keep a lid on costs and make sure you don't make some very expensive mistakes. Keep an eye on CloudWatch. We talked about an hour a day. Maybe it's 10 minutes a day or half an hour a day, but please just observe what's going on in your accounts and try and understand it a bit better. So, CloudWatch itself is amazing, but it can also be very expensive if you use it in certain ways and abuse it. So, one thing is, these are a couple of scenarios I've seen in organizations, if you abuse the put events. So basically CloudWatch normally monitors Amazon stuff. You can also put your own application events into it, which is fine, but it's not Kafka. And people tend to treat it as, oh, it's an event store, I can just send it loads of events. It's quite expensive, so you can have a developer using it and it'll be $10 a month, but if it gets to production, and it could be thousands of dollars a month. So just be aware that you should use these things for stuff, but don't use it for logging. Other stuff to be aware of is in terms of if you're actually pulling information from CloudWatch to a third-party system, if that's done sensibly, it's fine. So if you're using one of the big SaaS monitoring products, they'll do that. But if you've got, say, Prometheus set up locally, which is a system for aggregating sort of event-driven data, time series data, sorry. If you are then using Prometheus to poll CloudWatch every 10 seconds and pull every single metric, you're going to get a $10,000 bill at the end of the month. So just be aware of that. The other one is CloudWatch Logs. CloudWatch Logs is a great logging service that really gets you up and running quickly. But again, be conscious that unlike your on-premise logging system, where if you start throwing a massive amount of logs at it, the disk will fill up and it will fall over. What happens in CloudWatch Logs, it just keeps going. So if you've got developers pushing a bunch of Java applications into a dev environment and they turn debug on, you're going to get a very large bill. The other thing to be aware with CloudWatch Logs is be aware of recursive logging. So some of the patterns around usage of CloudWatch Logs is you log to CloudWatch Logs and then you ship the logs somewhere else using a Lambda function. I've seen it where this is actually using some of the Amazon's log shipping technology they've built as examples, is you log to CloudWatch Logs and then you want to get it into an ELK out stack. There's a Lambda function that Amazon provides that does that, moves it to Elasticsearch. I've seen a developer add log statements to that log shipping function, and then when there's a problem with it, it'll then log the logs back to the logs, and then you can see where that's going in terms of the recursive nature of it. And you can run in a bunch of things like that, because bear in mind that Amazon will just scale and will keep going, so you have to keep an eye on understanding what these things are. So I've seen logging go from $10,000 a month to $500 a month with no actual changes to the application architecture, just applying some common sense because someone added some extra log statements. So, other thing, networking. VPCs are really expensive. to redeploy in production. And we're not talking about what it costs you from Amazon, but it's about the operational cost to you as a business and actually what it affects in terms of what you can get done with that time. Networking is hard to replace in production because it basically means you've got to rebuild the whole environment. So small VPCs is a massive problem that people go, oh no, I'm going to build a network, I'm going to use 255 IP addresses. So I'm going to talk about CIDR, which is classed as inter-domain routing, which is CIDR notation. If you've seen it, it's a slash and then a number. That corresponds to a size of a network. So the smaller the number, the larger the network. Amazon supports the maximum size of a VPC is in a single net block. It's a /16, which is 65,000 odd IP addresses. You can now use multiple ones. You didn't used to be able to, but you can use one of those. Please just use that for your VPC. Unless you've got a requirement to run thousands of VPCs, you shouldn't really be worrying about just doing that. Things to be aware of is more and more Amazon services are using more IP addresses in accounts now. So load balancers will use at least 8. Every single Lambda execution that you're running concurrently that's attached to a VPC will use an ENI, so an IP address. So you can run out very quickly, especially containers. Each service may use an IP address if you've got VPC networking enabled. A bunch of things you can use. So please use big VPCs and use big subnets. One thing I've seen quite a lot is people think, I know, I'm going to make my staging environment look exactly like production, so they use the same address range. Sounds like a good idea, but it will give you problems down the line. And so please make sure you don't have IP address collision between any of your networks or VPCs you're running across your whole organization. There's obviously sort of, maybe not for dev and for sandboxes and these kind of things, but it's really try and make sure you have different IP address ranges for different networks. Because if you need to do things like security monitoring or you need to look at what it's doing end to end, you need to be able to have reachability into those networks if you do. So it's best to protect that. Otherwise, you're going to get into a real problem with routing. There's a bunch of great talks at reInvent about networking this year. Start with VPC fundamentals and connectivity options, which is Net 201, which is really good. I'd recommend anyone watch that if they're interested in VPC networking. So next up, building a foundation. So this is like, what would we do in the new world? So what would I do, basically, if I was building a new organization? This is the slide we saw earlier, which I skipped over, about organizations. Please use organizations. That's all I can say, really. It really is the direction of travel for a lot of new kind of security, monitoring, safety services that Amazon are producing. They're about the cloud itself, less about the applications that run within them. There is a blog that's worth going to and worth reading of all the kind of new product announcements around organizations. It's worth having a look if you're responsible for a number of Amazon accounts. So if I was using organizations, what would I build? Probably something like this. So this is a view on organizations has accounts and organizational units, or OUs, which is a nod to Microsoft Active Directory. But basically, you can have accounts, you can put them in OUs, you can organize policies based on account or OU level, you can kind of make it a bit more organized. So you can organize accounts based on environment, workload type, anything else like that. I would probably say, production development, and then also platform, which is quite important, and also add a sandbox if you can to let developers play around and use something like, there's a tool called AWS Nuke, which will delete everything in an Amazon account, run that every day, and you then won't incur a lot of cost. So quite important when you're building an organization, a bit of platform strategy work is, what I've done is to try and make sure you have one Amazon account with all of your users in it and use their email address as the username. Because quite often when activity is occurring in Amazon, you only get the name of the user that's being used. You don't get anything else. So if you need to notify someone about something going wrong, you need to have that available. Otherwise, you're going to have to build another directory. We can look at things like single sign and everything like that, but usually that's probably more than most organizations, unless you're a very large enterprise, will want to do. Tools like Okta and stuff like this will help with single sign into AWS. Also look at a security account in which you aggregate all data. And you can have break glass user accounts in there if you need privileged access to things. So again, this is the identity access about users. Stop using the root account for anything. Please, that's really important. You do that as soon as possible, because that is basically like using root for doing everything. Limit the number of API keys in source code to get it out. There's a tool called Git Secrets Amazon have written, which can be a pre-commit hook, or it can be something that will monitor as part of a pipeline and look for any API key credentials. Please use that. Last thing is about assume role, which is if you've got your account in one account, you need access to another account, you do it by assuming role in that account. There's a guide here on how you do that. It's really useful. You can enforce MFA on that as well, so ensure when you move into a new account, they have to have used an MFA token to do it. Use roles. If anyone's on a certification, you'll find out everyone should use roles rather than user accounts. So if you're building something in an instance, that instance should be running, it should be using a role to then assume and use privileges in Amazon AWS. A few other things is also, I'd really recommend just reading the API documentation for the CLI. It's probably about 2-3 hours worth of read to understand about how you use the Amazon CLI. There's lots of stuff in there that isn't self-evident or obvious that makes your life as a developer and an engineer a lot easier. So it's just really reading it. Talk about tagging strategy now. This is something we talked about a minute ago. It's really worth looking at a tagging strategy. Keep it simple, but it will massively improve your ability to understand what you're running in your accounts and how you can then automate what's going on in those accounts. I'd say, use something like what's the environment it's in, what application is it, who owns it, and what does it do? So is it a web server, is it something else? It allows you to then start to understand what workloads you've got and drive automated behavior from it. So about pragmatic VPC design. So as I said, use large VPCs. You don't have to worry about it. Use large subnets. This is a kind of little straw man I put together. But you also have to understand that an Amazon network is not like a physical network or a data center network. Subnets aren't really subnets. They're more kind of a logical container for stuff. So if you're working in an environment which has a lot of traditional on-prem stuff or you've got a lot of networking experience, you need to kind of take a step away from that. There's a good presentation that Amazon does sometimes called, I think, Another Day, Another Billion Packets. It's probably another trillion packets now. It's worth a watch. It talks about what's going on with VPCs under the hood. If you want a subnet, the closest analogy to a subnet is actually probably a security group, not a subnet, because it works around layer 2 and various other things. So it's worth looking at that. But it's also about probably only need a public subnet, the green ones, and a private subnet, the blue ones. You probably don't need a database subnet or other things because there's actually no technical benefit to having one. The only reason you need to create extra subnets is if you want to do fun things with routing, and that's usually beyond most use cases. So yeah, make a large network. There is now a new service called shared VPCs. So if you want to have your networking in one account and have all your applications in other accounts, you can share that network with them, which makes things a bit more simpler from a management perspective. But yeah, just use a large network. There's a slide down here, which is advanced VPC design, which is worth looking if you want to know about the new stuff in networking. If you're a network engineer, but not that familiar with AWS, it'll explain a lot more kind of more interesting concepts that are happening at the moment. So that is kind of done. So there we go, guys. That's my quick sort of whirlwind tour. Does anyone got any questions or anything you want to ask about that?
Oh, the microphone works as well.
Hi, you mentioned before about the AWS support and how can you reach out for them. And I know there are multiple tiers of AWS support.
Yep.
In your experience, would you get that kind of support you mentioned with them really helping you even on the entry-level tier, or is that only on
So it's the business support one. So it's not the entry-level developer support. So there's 4 tiers of support. You've got kind of no support, I think it's basic support or developer support, business support, and then enterprise support. With business support is the one you need to get if you're a smaller organization. If you can get enterprise, go for it, but literally you need to chop your arm off. It's quite expensive. But you'll get that kind of support with business, so they'll help you with queries about line notes and anything else. They will get that, and I think the key thing with support is if you don't ask, you won't get. So I know there's numerous small organizations in the UK who've gone to AWS via support channels and via account management channels to ask for help, and they've gotten a huge amount of support in terms of selling into larger organizations and doing other things. So the key is with AWS is if you're a customer and you've got real genuine use cases, just talk to someone at Amazon, raise a case, see what people can do to help you. Not always, but quite often they will help.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Cool. Well, I'll just say thank you, guys. Thank you to Phil, Rick, everyone else who's done a lot of work for organising. Thank you to my employer letting me be here today. We are recruiting. If you want to talk about, come talk to me.
Say it again, Jonty. You're recruiting. Right,
yeah, I am recruiting. Yeah. So come and have a word with me if you're an architect or a tech lead who wants to work in a microservices organisation moving to serverless. Come and have a word. All right, and that's it.
Fantastic.
Right.
Thank you,
guys.
Jonty.